What's up, everybody? My name is Troy, but I also go by Tangle of Boots, and today I have a video covering the PEBA Orange Division League. Now, I am in the Blue Division, I'm a player in the Blue Division, but I happen to be modding the Discord for the Orange League, and I thought, you know what? Everybody else, the analysts, they're doing power rankings, so why don't I give it a shot? I'm by no means a great analyst, at least I don't think so. I kind of, focus more on myself in terms of playing, but I'm willing to give everybody, at least my input. Maybe it can help some people in terms of how they think about their team, or, maybe I can point out some weaknesses that they didn't see before, and hopefully, they can help work on those. Or, maybe I can help people figure out what the, scarier drafts are, I guess, so they can plan accordingly. But I do want to warn everybody that obviously this is all my opinion. Please don't get upset at me. I'm just trying to give feedback is all. It really sucks because I'm actually really impressed with everybody's drafts in the Orange Division. For being considered the quote unquote D2, the second division. You guys really came out swinging with the drafts, and they're actually pretty impressive. So it was really hard to place some people lower. It was really hard, but somebody has to be 16th, somebody has to be first. That's just how it goes. I think everybody's draft has good things about it, but I also think there are some that are better than others. So keep in mind, it's all my opinion. And with that, I'm going to start at number 16 and we'll work our way up. So at number 16, I have Evie Master. Now, I already feel bad. Evie Master has a pretty good team. There's just a lot of nitpicks I have with it, and all those nitpicks add up, and they eventually landed Evie Master down at number 16, and I want to explain why. Problems I noticed with Evie's team is repeating typings and weaknesses. So just taking a look at his team, he has Tapu Fini, Lantern, and Lapras, all three water types. And sometimes stacking an extra type or a certain type isn't bad, but it can really, kind of start to be scary after a certain point if you don't have certain Pokemon to check those weaknesses. Now I know Lantern, for example, can get Volt Absorb, so he can take the electric attacks for Tapu Fini and Lantern. But all three are weak to grass. All of his resistances to grass happen to be weak to fire, because he has Amoonguss and Bronzong, or Noivern, who is frail anyways. So that's just one thing to consider. He also happens to have three psychic types. Medicham, Espeon, and Bronzong, all weak to Shadow Ball. He does happen to have Porygon Z to be the switch-in for a Ghost move, but my bigger point here is having one Pokemon that, can cover those weaknesses isn't enough. An additional problem that I notice with Eevee's team is how some of the Pokemon are relatively inconsistent. Gigalith is a pick that I feel a bit iffy about, considering that it doesn't necessarily do much besides gives Excadrill a sand boost, and I totally understand that, but I feel like Excadrill is consistent enough on its own to grant it not having Gigalith on the roster. That's just my personal opinion. I know that Sand can help a lot, but there are other Pokemon on the team that can, perhaps use Sandstorm as just a move that they learn. Other notes, I do notice a problem with, kinda with speed. Amoonguss, Bronzong, Gigalith, all very slow. Tapu Fini isn't exactly hitting the high marks, neither is Lapras. He does have a couple fast threats like Espeon, for example, Noivern, or that Excadrill in the sand. So, you've got some mixed speed going on, but overall, I do see some of the things on here being slow to the point where it's kind of hindering. In terms of good stuff, there really is good stuff on Eevee's team. I don't want to just tear it down completely. Mega Medicham is a phenomenal Mega, and having Tapu Fini on its side is really useful, because with Tapu Fini, You know, you avoid Medicham from being burned, all that sorts of stuff. I don't like Tapu Fini being on the same team as Sableye. That's another thing. I don't like how you have the Tapu that avoids, you know, all status on both sides, and then you have Sableye, which is probably the most infamous status inducer in the game. It also kind of limits Espeon's usage a little bit, because Espeon's big advantage is Magic Bounce, and yes, you can bounce away hazards, but a big key is bouncing away status, and people aren't even really going to be planning on bringing status if you have Tapu Fini, unless they have some other way around it. So while I see the idea behind having Espeon and the idea behind Sableye, I don't think they work well together with Tapu Fini. Another good thing, though, that I really do like is, you know, the kind of offensive options that are happening here. Porygon Z, while it can't necessarily abuse the Z moves that it normally does on the Showdown ladder, it does get some pretty unique options in terms of Z moves, so I'm interested to see how that will work. In terms of the Mega, like I already said, Mega Medicham is phenomenal. They do kind of work well together offensively, I feel. I really just do think it's all of these little nitpicks and problems that I see that people will be able to pick this team apart on, and I think it's really just a few trades away from being a really good team. At number 15, I have my good buddy Kenneth, who I should give a warning to those of you that don't know. I am friends with Kenneth, so I'm a little biased normally when it comes to Kenneth, but I had to just base this off of his team and his team alone and not him as a player, because I know that Kenneth as a player can do well with this team. Kenneth's team, to, you know, a outside perspective, this kind of looks like a grab bag team of just random things thrown together. He does have a good Fairy Dragon Steel core, which I wanted to acknowledge. He does have Dragonite, Clefable, and Empoleon, which I really like. I think that's really solid. Especially because Empoleon is a great defogger, and that helps Dragonite in terms of keeping its multi-scale intact. I think that's phenomenal. Articuno is strange, so is Mega Pidgeot and Dragonite, you know, all on the same team, but my boy likes his flying type, so I can't really, you know, bash him for it. He's gonna draft what he wants to draft. That's kind of just how Kenneth works. He is missing a Water Fire Grass core, which isn't necessarily too detrimental, but it is something I do, you know, think could have helped. He has Slowking and Empoleon, and while I understand how having both can help, because Empoleon isn't a reliable bulky water without recovery, I do think that a fire type somewhere on his team could have helped maybe, in place of that Zoroark, for example, in Tier 4, but that's just my opinion. I'm going to predict that Kenneth will get ranked regularly pretty low in other analysts' power rankings, but I do honestly think that in terms of performance, Kenneth can do a really good job. You know, if he really falls into place with his team, I know that Kenneth can be really creative with his sets and his strategies, so I'm excited to see what he can do. And I'm also really excited to see what Z Ditto can do. I'm really intrigued by that in general. I definitely want to see what Kenneth can predict the opponent to have with Z Ditto and stuff like that. Maybe use Z moves against them that they can't even use. It's very interesting to me. So overall, an interesting team. Obviously, you know, it lacks, I think, a lot of what other people want to see in a draft, and that's, you know, a presence of a lot of reliable threats and a team that's very cohesive in its plan. This doesn't seem to have an overarching plan behind it, and that's the biggest problem I see with it. Moving on to number 14, we have Wishmaker. Wishmaker, I actually really like his draft in terms of specific Pokemon that he has. I think Tapu Koko, Mega Aerodactyl, Kyurem Black, those are all huge threats. Cresselia, I even forgot about that one. Amazingly huge threats, but the more I looked into his team, I kind of started to realize how much they don't really fit together all that well, at least in my opinion. There's a really good chance that I'm just not seeing something that he does, or maybe he, plays a different way that I do. But there's a lot of things that don't necessarily click in my head in terms of these Pokemon being partners. Aerodactyl, for example, seems strange next to Tapu Koko for me. I don't necessarily know exactly why that is. It's interesting because Aerodactyl does have the ground immunity for Tapu Koko, but these are two very frail glass cannons. And something that doesn't quite click to me is how you're kind of encouraging people to bring electric moves against you, and that kind of hinders your Mega Aerodactyl. I do like how there is another electric type with Galvantula. I think that's cool that, you can at least abuse the terrain a little bit more. The cores are present. We have Kyurem Black, Ferrothorn, and Tapu Koko as a Fairy Dragon Steel core, but for some reason this core feels incomplete to me. Tapu Koko, while I think it's an excellent Pokemon, I don't feel like it's a Fairy type in the traditional sense. It's more of an electric type to me. And also, they're all just so radically different in terms of what they do. Ferrothorn is strictly defensive. You don't necessarily see offensive Ferrothorns. I mean, it's possible, but it's not what you're going to be running regularly. Tapu Koko, on the other hand, is very, very offensive and very frail. Completely different tone in terms of how it works. And then Kyurem Black is a little bit of both, I guess. He's kind of a link between because he has good overall stats, but he generally does get relegated to more of an offensive Pokemon. You also have a Water Fire Grass core that I think is even weaker, with Blastoise, which holds the Z Crystal, Houndoom, and Ferrothorn. And none of these necessarily stand out to me what a Fire Water Grass core really is when it comes to mind. Blastoise doesn't make for a traditional bulky water, besides the fact that, he's just a water type with good defenses. There's no real recovery happening. Blastoise is just kind of rapid spin support to me. Houndoom doesn't have the damage output I feel like should be present in the fire type for this team. And then Ferrothorn has to double down on his role in the team as being both the grass type for the grass core and steel type for the steel core. So overall, I just feel like the cores are a little messy. The team is also pretty hazard prone. I forgot to mention that. Blastoise can rapid spin, or Donphan can rapid spin as well. But the bigger picture here is how hazards can kind of chip down some of these Pokemon. Sawk will lose its Sturdy, Galvantula will lose its potential Focus Sash, Kyurem Black takes 25%, which it really doesn't like to do on every Self-Rock switch in, as does Aerodactyl. Tapu Koko also won't be able to Volt Switch around as freely as it would like to, so I definitely see hazard control being a little bit of an issue considering both of the removers are pretty slow. Overall, I have a lot of nitpicks with it, but it does have threats that I can't ignore, such as the Tapu Koko, the Kyurem Black, the Aerodactyl, the Cresselia. So I can't place it, at the bottom, but I do think there is a lot of things that could be worked on in terms of this draft. Next up we have Kyrak or Krak. I don't really exactly know how to say it. I'm sorry if I mispronounce anybody's names on here or their tags or nicknames or whatever. I'm trying to do my best here. But anyways, his team I originally had a lower, but he actually made a trade immediately after the draft happened, and it actually made me move him up more. I know he's not exactly very high, but I had him, I think, second to last before, and his trade definitely helped move him up in my eyes. So he originally had Mega Slowbro, but now he has Mega Sceptile, and that helped him mainly for the speed problem I noticed in his team. Having something with that good of a speed tier is huge, and I think it bolstered his team a lot. It also completed an uncompleted core, where now he has a Dragon type for a Fairy Dragon Steel and a Fire Water Grass core, 2 in 1. Mega Sceptile, Heatran, and Primarina all, share the properties of those cores, and they mesh together effectively, I feel. Each of those can fill the roles of those types well, and they can also do a variety of things. Primarina can be defensive and offensive. Heatran can be, fast offensive, slow defensive support, maybe some kind of mixed. I've seen Heatran run Taunt, Stealth Rocks, you name it, as, a fourth move on an offensive set. So Heatran can do a lot, and then Sceptile can be physical, it can be special, it can be mixed. It gets access to different kinds of setup. So I'm eager to see what Mega Sceptile can do in place of Slowbro. I definitely think it was a good trade. I'm also very interested to see what Z Gothitelle can do. Gothitelle is an interesting Z captain to me, considering the bread and butter of a Gothitelle with Shadow Tag is Choice Scarf. But I'm interested to see how you can use Shadow Tag in terms of trapping the opponent and then maybe using a really powerful Z move or maybe a Z status move and forcing them to kind of deal with what's in front of them. I think that's a really interesting choice. But there are problems that I notice. Some of these Pokemon I consider to be a little unreliable. Minior, for example, is a Pokemon that I feel not many people have tapped into its potential yet in Draft League format, and while, who knows, maybe he'll be the first one to do so, I'm a little bit skeptical whenever I see Minior appear on a draft because people haven't really been able to find their footing with one in a Draft League, at least that I've seen. Maybe I'm just not in touch with it enough. But Minior is a pick that kind of makes me, a little uneasy. The team also has a bit of a flying problem, at least that's my observation. Other notes I have is that the team is a little bit on the slow side. I will say that the Sceptile really changed my mind about how I felt about it. I don't really believe in Trick Room teams for draft format. That's my personal opinion. I don't really think it's a very viable strategy. It can work out, but you really need to catch your opponent off guard, and normally that works by taking a somewhat fast Pokemon and making it slow. That's normally where I've seen Trick Room work, is when you kind of alter people's expectations at team preview. You're just like, oh, I thought that was going to be a fast Pokemon, but it's a slow Pokemon. Your base 100s are really good candidates for stuff like that, or maybe even like your base 90s or 80s. But I don't think a Trick Room team, like a full Trick Room team, works well in Draft League because it's only going to last for so many turns, and especially if your opponent anticipates it, it can be easy to work around. So I don't really like the idea of an overly slow team. As we can see, there's Crabominable, there's Cofagrigus, there's Snorlax, there's Primarina, and there's Marowak, all really slow. You could even throw Gothitelle in there, which is a Trick Room setter, along with Cofagrigus. But I guess it is helped a little bit by the faster Pokemon such as Lycanroc and Mega Sceptile. And Scolipede also deserves an honorable mention because he can baton pass speed, but that's not all I want to see that Scolipede do. I want to see that Scolipede do other things, and I hope it's not just a speed passer. I hope I get to see some other cool things that Scolipede can do. Scolipede is, you should not sleep on Scolipede in terms of offense, but that's just my opinion. It's up to him to use it to its fullest potential, or its team's fullest potential. Up next we have Jutun, or Jutun, or Jutun. I don't really know how to say this one either. I'm just going to hope that one of those is right. I have him at number 12. And I originally had his team a little bit higher, but this was another one of those teams that over time I kind of lowered it a little bit more as I really thought about it more. One of my biggest issues with the team is how it can somewhat rely on not necessarily gimmicks, but some of these Pokemon feel a bit gimmicky. Xurkitree, for example, as a Z captain, while Xurkitree is a threat and that thing is powerful, I don't want to see this thing run Z Electric Terrain, for example, or Z Hypnosis, because I feel like these are tried and common strategies that I feel like people will be able to prepare for. Xurkitree, while it does have a really remarkable special attack stat, isn't very different from a lot of other electric types in the fact that it's pretty much always going to have Thunderbolt, Hidden Power Ice unless it gets Ice Beam, and then maybe Volt Switch, and then maybe some other coverage move or status move. So what the bigger picture I'm trying to get at there is that circuitry is a bit easy to prepare for, I feel like, and so it kind of limits its capacity as a Z captain unless you are planning on using it for gimmicks. But even then, I feel like those gimmicks get found out over time, and you know, people will be ready for them. Now again, of course, maybe there's something I'm missing about circuitry in terms of Z moves. Maybe I'm completely glossing over some things, but that's just my observation. In terms of the rest of the team, though, there are a lot of things I really do like. Mega Gardevoir, Celesteela, and Dredagon makes a core that I really do like. Dredagon feels like the weak link there, but that's definitely a really solid core that I can get behind. A big problem I do have with it, though, is that Ice isn't really answered by the Steel type here, whereas you normally want it to be answered by the Steel type here because the Steel type is supposed to take the Ice moves for the Dragon type. And Celesteela, I mean, it is defensive, that's for sure, but it does take those hits neutrally. Now, we do have Suicune and Emboar. Moving on to the other core, we have Suicune, Dhelmise, and Emboar. This one, I can't really tell if I like it or not. Part of me really likes the idea of Suicune, Dhelmise, and Emboar being together, but part of me also really doesn't. It feels kind of slow. They all kind of feel like they're good Pokemon on their own, but I don't know how well they'll work together. Dhelmise and Suicune, you know, seem to kind of be different playstyles to me. Suicune being something that's more of maybe a bulky defense, not exactly a straight stall Pokemon, but it's definitely more on the defensive end, whereas in Dhelmise, it's kind of a bulky offense Pokemon, because it doesn't really have the recovery, and it's kind of there to deal damage, maybe Rapid Spin, be a spin blocker, but that's kind of it. And then Emboar, on the other end, I see as kind of being a hyper offense Pokemon, or maybe, I guess, on more of the bulky offense spectrum. But overall, I feel like these Pokemon couldn't, or in terms of being a core, those Pokemon don't necessarily mesh the way I'd like to see a Fire, Water, Grass core mesh. But that doesn't say this team is without the awesome parts. I really like all the different hazard options this team has in terms of Garbodor with the Toxic Spikes, Omastar with the Stealth Rocks, Levany with the Sticky Webs. Oh, I'm completely sorry. Omastar also gets Spikes as well. So you have all the options here. The speed is a little lackluster. I keep drilling people for their speed, but it is something that I feel like is pretty important. Speed tiers are a big deal, and so is speed creeping, and if somebody knows that they can outrun your whole team with a certain Pokemon, they can run Adamant instead of Jolly, or Modest instead of Timid. So it's a big deal if they can outspeed you with their fast Pokemon. While I think that this team has its plus sides, the speed does worry me. Now, Levany is there to slow down the opposition, but not everything is going to be affected by the webs, and hazard removal can help out with that. Moving on to number 11, we have Toasty, who has an impressive draft, I would say. Mega Charizard X is always a threat, and I feel weird for putting a team with Charizard so low. Mega Charizard X, I should say, who I personally believe is the stronger of the two in this format. Considering you do lose part of the Stealth Rock weakness, Dragon's a great defensive typing, and he does have an impressive Fairy Dragon Steel core with Mega Charizard X and Skarmory and Florges, but it's a bit interesting because Skarmory and Florges fill out the defensive side, and then Charizard X fills out the offensive side, and I'm not too convinced how well these Pokemon will work directly together. I do like how Charizard can be defensive sometimes, and it can take hits for Skarmory if it needs to. I think there's a great type synergy there. And I mean, as well as Florges, obviously it can take the Dragon hits for Charizard X. But this team has overall just a very weird mix of offense and defense that kind of don't seem like they'd work well together in terms of a cohesive playstyle. It seems to me like the only really hard hitters in the team are Nihilego and Charizard X, while everything else offensive, such as Hitmonchan and Heliolisk, are a little bit either limited in their move pools or, you know, missing a little bit in terms of stats. Hitmonchan is a great Pokemon, but he shouldn't be, you know, the star of the show in terms of offense. Charizard X also can't really pull all the weight on his own, so, you know, you have Vaporeon, you have Florges, you have Necrozma, all kind of more defensively stacked Pokemon. I do have to shout out Tangela being on the team. Tangela is good defensively, and we do have a Fire Water Grass core as well with Charizard X, Vaporeon, and Tangela, but again, Charizard X is the offensive side of things again. And the only one, because Tangela and Vaporeon, I mean, Vaporeon has decent special attack, and Tangela has okay attacking stats, but they're meant to be defensive, I feel. And they work well in defensive roles for this team. So, I guess my point is, this team has a lot going for it in its cores in terms of defense, and then the offense kind of just seems to be tacked on. This will be a team that does better based on the player. Yanmega, I understand a little bit the idea behind it being a Z captain since it's so fast, but part of me also is a little bit confused as to why, considering, you know, making your Z captain something 4 times weak to Stealth Rocks, and you have a Mega that's 4 times weak to Stealth Rocks before you Mega Evolve, you're basically asking people to bring hazards against you. That's a bit of a call that I don't necessarily like, per se. But otherwise, I mean, I still get the reasoning, so I'm not gonna criticize too hard on that one. So yeah, I think there's a lot of really solid picks on here. I do like the Hitmonchan, I like the Heliolisk, I like the Charizard X. Skarmory and Florges I even like really well with the Charizard X. I really think this team could either benefit from switching to fully more of a defensive team, maybe even running more defensive Charizard X, like with Will-O-Wisp and Roost, or becoming a more fully offensive team and getting a more offensive Steel type, and maybe instead of Florges getting something more like Sylveon. But we'll see, I could be wrong. Falling at number 10, I have EasyBake. EasyBake has a very good team on paper, I have to say. His top 3 picks with Megalopony, Manaphy, and Zapdos really impress me, to the point of it being like astonishing to me that he has those 3 together. I think those are probably 3 of the best Pokemon in the format, which is really weird because I'm saying all this and I still have him at number 10, but I'll get to why. I feel like a lot of people will think it's almost blasphemous that I have him this low, but there's certain things that I feel like I just have so many little nitpicks about this team that eventually stack up and eventually brought him this low to me. If I have a team with Megalopony on it this low, that kind of also just tells you how good I think everybody in this league did with their drafts. One of the first things is that there's a little bit of a repeating type issue. He stacks certain typings such as Psychic. We have Reuniclus, we have Latias, we have Mr. Mime. He stacks Dragon just slightly with Latias and Kyurem at the same time. I don't understand the need for both. I personally don't get that. I feel like you only really need one or the other, but that's just me. Who knows, maybe double dragons will work out. Maybe this is something I'm not, you know, aware of and it's actually gonna work out pretty great. But something about having both is a bit strange to me. I feel like one of them could be dropped in favor of something that helps with the other weaknesses on the team. There are cores present, but they're offensive. You have Manaphy, you have Blaziken, and you have Kartana as the Fire, Water, Grass, which I kind of like this core. Part of the issue for me, though, is that for this core to be completely sturdy, I feel like you need really reliable defensive switch-ins for all of these Pokemon. I can see it easily needing to sack off other Pokemon on this team to keep it alive. In terms of Fairy Dragon Steel, there isn't one. Well, there is one, but this brings me to my next biggest problem, which is Z Mr. Mime. The reason there's so many threats on this team, but he had to pay the price for it with Z Mr. Mime. Mr. Mime is a Z captain, and there's so many good Z captain candidates on this team. Which again comes to the fact with these double dragons. Like, if he had chosen to just take one of them, he could have had more points and then gotten a better Z captain. Potentially even a better fairy, and then made like Latias or Kyurem his Z captain, which I think would have been much better. So, I mean, I have a little bit of hang-ups with that. But, I mean, overall, there is some really great stuff happening on this team. I like how there's multiple ground immunities, and there's not even really any ground weaknesses besides the Blaziken. Something about that is just kind of cool to me, because you're just, you know, you're making certain Pokemon just non-threats right off the bat, you know? I expect Megalopony to do Megalopony things, which is win games. So, while I have this team at number 10, I do think that it'll actually probably do a little bit better than a number 10 spot. It's just solely based off of all these little nitpicks that I have that brings it down this low for me. At number 9, I have Todd, who drafted a really interesting team. He drafted some things I've never seen before in League play. One of them is a Nosepass, and one of them is a Mega Garchomp. Clearly different ends of the spectrum, but I've never seen either, so I'm really curious how that's going to go. Some of the parts of it work really well together, and some of them just don't at all. And I'll kind of explain what I mean. You have things on here like the Quagsire, the Dusknoir, the Fortress, the Porygon 2, very defensive. I really like the Quagsire and the Fortress working together. I think that's a great defensive combo. The Crobat also works pretty nicely. It does give him some much needed speed, as well as the Whimsicott. Victini, always a threat, as well as Thundurus T. Also some great speed, which kind of makes you forget about the fact that Mega Garchomp is below base 100 speed. I do expect Crobat and Whimsicott to be able to help with Tailwind from time to time, and maybe even Porygon 2 with Trick Room. That could definitely be a thing. Dusknoir, I believe, also has access. Again, I don't condone full Trick Room teams for Draft League. I think that's kind of almost a death wish. You want to be able to have a variety in your speed tiers, but it can work, you know, to end a game with a sweep, and Mega Garchomp does have offensive potential. That's one of the things I want to say about this team. There's good defensive potential and there's good offensive potential. It seems to lack maybe a Pokemon or two that really makes me feel like, everything fits together. Like, just looking through, I see the intent. I see like what each Pokemon is supposed to do in these roles, but something just still feels missing after all of it. Bisharp feels like a little bit of an outlier, just looking at the team. I know he is a great offensive threat, but with Porygon 2, Pangoro even, you have these other fighting weaknesses, and you're going to have to rely on Crobat and Whimsicott, which aren't exactly bulky. I know you can run defensive Crobat with Roost, but you're going to have to rely on those for taking your fighting attacks. I guess you could also rely on Dusknoir, which, I mean, it's not unheard of, I guess, but Dusknoir also has a problem with being whittled down. Doesn't necessarily appreciate it. I will say I like the Thundurus T as a Z captain. I always like to see Victini. Victini is a monster. The versatility is great. Quagsire, again, with Fortress, pretty scary. Porygon 2, defensive monster. And I actually will defend the Nosepass pick, because with Stealth Rocks and Sturdy, Volt Switch, you can do some pretty cool stuff with Eviolite to get up rocks, get out of there, and get something more threatening in, like that Victini or like that Garchomp. It's also cool because I believe Mega Garchomp gets a Sand ability. I believe it's Sand Force, and Nosepass can run, you know, Sturdy with Sandstorm and just immediately set it up for Garchomp. So something like that could be really cool to see. Just an idea. This team does actually look like it could work pretty well in the sand, considering you have the Quagsire and the Fortress who won't really be whittled down, the Garchomp and the Bisharp as well. Crobat could be a good candidate for something like safety goggles. I don't know, these are just ideas. So I really like the team. I only have it at number 9, simply just because there's teams I like more than this one. And speaking of that, I'll move on to that. At number 8, we have Aaron, who has a really menacing team, I have to say. Mega Gallade and Tapu Lele is a devastating combo. I feel like people talk more about Lele and Alakazam or Lele and Gardevoir, but Mega Gallade is also equally as threatening with Psycho Cut or Zen Headbutt being boosted. The Meloetta is also on there, which can be another abuser of the Psychic Terrain. So definitely A+ for the Mega and the Tapu choice here. I think it really works well. There are a couple of conflicts with Tapu Lele being on the team though. Klefki is one where priority will be blocked and you have a prankster Pokemon. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. Don't necessarily know if I like that or not. I'm not exactly sure how that interacts, but I'm pretty sure you're not allowed to use prankster moves with Tapu Lele's terrain intact. So maybe just wait for the terrain to run out or run Air Balloon, I guess, or I don't know. I don't know what you'd have to do. You can't Magnetize off the terrain because it'll get blocked. It's priority. I also think Serena is almost a little weird with it because it's just like your ability is the same thing as your terrain. But I guess you could run the other abilities if you wanted to get the advantage of both. Speaking of Serena, we have a core of Arcanine, Serena, and Alomomola, which I actually really like. I think it's really solid. They all kind of fill really good roles with each other. Alomomola can heal the other two. They can all heal themselves if they need to. Serena has the heal bell support. Arcanine has the offense. So, throughout this entire power rankings video, I've been kind of assessing cores by how well they fit together, and a lot of them I've been saying, you know, this has like 2 defensive mons and 1 offensive mon, or this has 2 offensive mons and then 1 defensive mon. This is the best way I think it is to make a core where you have one that's really defensive, which is Alomomola. You have one that's kind of a balanced Pokemon like Serena, which has good defenses and good bulk, but it also has offensive options. It's not necessarily brought because it's a hard hitter per se, but you can use it to hit back as well as heal. And then Arcanine, who is way more on the offensive side, he can be defensive. I'm pretty sure everybody's familiar with an impish Arcanine with Rocky Helmet, but Arcanine can also, you know, run Choice Band. He can run Expert Belt. Arcanine is a great offensive threat, so I really like his addition to the team. There's a Fairy Dragon Steel core, Tapu Lele, Klefki, and Z Salamence. Z Salamence, by the way, super threatening. Z Draco Meteor's going to be hitting crazy hard, or I mean, you can run Z Outrage. Doesn't even have to be a dragon move. Z Fly, Z anything pretty much. Salamence has so many tools at its disposal. Lots of great options you can do. There's no shortage on this team of different hazard options, different hazard removal options. Overall, really great team. Has pretty much everything that a draft team needs. You have your Volt Switcher, utility, you have good offense, you have good defense. You have some mixed attackers on here, which is always good to have. You can run Arcanine mixed if you want to, you can run Salamence mixed if you want to, you can run Electros mixed if you want to. Even Meloetta, if you're using the Pirouette form, you can kind of run a mixed set with that. So I think this is actually a really great team. I really like it. I definitely want to see Mega Gallade do well. I think it's pretty underrated. I know a lot of people know about Mega Gallade and how good it is, but I feel like a lot of people also have never really seen it do well. But I think it's definitely one of the best Megas. So With that being said, I'm going to move on to talk about number 7. At number 7, we have Cliff, who has a amazing team actually. I really love this team as well. I have to support Mega Altaria, the Scizor, and even the Mantine, because those are all Pokemon that I have in the Blue League, but we're talking about the Orange League here. So there's also a lot of really huge threats that he has that I don't, such as the Landorus, definitely threatening. Seeing that thing alongside Mega Altaria, I definitely think is crazy, because you have probably one of the best Megas in the format, in my opinion, beside one of the best offensive Mons possible in League format, so I think that's great. The Z Captain, oh my gosh, Azelf is a great Z Captain. The fact even that it's a Psychic type and the knockoffs are weakened because you're holding a Crystal, and the wide move pool of Azelf, definitely cool. Like to see that the Z Captain is Azelf out of all the options he had. I definitely think it was the best choice for being the Z Captain. He's a little frail, but over something like Landorus Eye, which would have just made people more scared of it to begin with, I'm glad that they picked Azelf. This team has really stellar offensive potential. You'll see the Greninja, you'll see the Staraptor, everything else I already mentioned. The Scizor even has priority, so does the Staraptor and the Greninja. Shouldn't forget about that. But yeah, the Landorus Eye, Altaria can set up and be threatening too. Even the lower tier picks like Miss Magius with Nasty Plot or Calm Mind can even do some serious damage. My biggest problem with the team is that it lacks a solid defensive backbone. There's all this great offense, but there's not really anything for, these Pokemon to really turn to in terms of taking hits for them, besides maybe the Mantine and the Roserade, I guess. The Regirock's there. I shouldn't forget about the Regirock, but he doesn't have a proper way to heal himself, whereas Roserade does. I believe it gets Synthesis. You could also do Rest with Natural Cure. That's a strategy you can run. Mantine obviously gets Roost now. And I guess you could use Scizor defensively if you really needed to. But other than that, I think this team lacks the ability to, be able to take the hits to be able to protect these offensive Pokemon. Which means this team might need to play a little more, hyper offense, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just more of an observation than anything. It's just important to note that this team might lack certain switch-ins. For example, Ice is a big problem. You'll see Mega Altaria, Landorus Eye, Staraptor, the Roserade, even the Mantine if we're talking about Freeze Dry, all weak to Ice. It's a pretty big problem. Scizor and Regirock, pretty much the only real reliable switch-ins. I guess you can count Magmortar, but I don't see Magmortar being used too much, but who knows, might be surprising. So overall, team really impressive offensively, really impressive on paper, I think, but definitely will need to lean towards more offensive playstyle. Cliff's going to have to know when to sack the right Pokemon, keep track of his win conditions very efficiently in order to seal wins without these defensive Pokemon that he really needs. Or maybe not needs, but could use. He'll have to make the correct sacks and be pretty precise with his play level in order to pull out wins. Unless if, Landorus Eye just sweeps teams like how it always does. So we'll definitely see. At number 6 we have Fidaki. He's actually my friend and he goes by Zach. He has a pretty impressive team, I gotta say. It looks really strange on the surface, I feel. He drafted Mega Audino and Magearna back to back, and it was really strange seeing dual fairies, but just as the team came together, I realized it was pretty impressive. So, starting off, if we talk about cores, there is no dragon, but we do have double fairies, kind of to make up for it. We do have double steel types as well. So like we're missing the dragon part of the fairy, dragon, steel, but the fairy and the steel are kind of doubled up on, which I kind of like. I know that's strange considering how much I've been emphasizing cores, but Mega Audino and Magearna cover each other really well. Durant also really works well as, you know, an offensive steel type. In case of Magearna needs to run a more defensive set, can't really be an offensive steel type in terms of team composition. There's threats all over this team. I feel like people were gonna immediately underestimate. I feel like people were immediately going to underestimate this draft as soon as they saw Mega Audino, but there's so many great things about it. I love Landers T and Mienshao being really fast U-turners. Also just really potent offensive threats. Nidoking, in my opinion, one of the best, most versatile Pokemon in the format. I'm not necessarily fast enough, you know, to be a top tier threat, but you know, you can run it physical, you can run it special, you can run so many different moves on it. Not to mention he's a stealth rocker. You've got the Scrafty, one of those Pokemon that has, you know, every one of its abilities is good. Z Araquanid as a captain. I really like Araquanid. I'm not exactly sure about it being the Z captain, but I understand why in terms of like having to do it for points, because I think Lando T probably would have been maybe the best Z captain, but Z Araquanid is actually probably his second best option. Landers T or Magearna would have been really good as a Z captain, but Z Araquanid isn't anything to, you know, bat an eye at, because if you think about Water Bubble and, you know, a Z, like a Hydro Vortex, that's gonna hurt even if it's like Bubble that's being used, you know? Araquanid hits incredibly hard with water. You could even potentially run other kinds of Z moves on Araquanid, which I know it's crazy imagining Araquanid using anything else besides a water move, but it's possible. So I really like the idea of Araquanid. Also, I completely forgot to mention, the Fire Water Grass core is actually really insane. I really like it. Slowbro, Decidueye, and Rotom Heat. I love that Rotom Heat and Slowbro are all kind of pivots, and then Decidueye can trap. I think that's really cool and really clever. I want to see that work. Rotom Heat patches up actually a lot of weaknesses this team has. Ice, for example, is a problem that this team could have with, you know, Landers T and Nidoking constantly needing to be protected. Rotom Heat can take those hits. Normally I would comment about the fact that this core, 2 of the 3 Pokemon are weak to Ghost, and the third doesn't even resist it, but Mega Audino has the Ghost immunity. So I think if he incorporates Mega Audino into that trio, it could actually really work well. And I'm actually really excited to see what he can do with this team. As far as nitpicks go, could use a different hazard setter that isn't weak to ice. Both of his hazard setters are weak to ice. They're both ground types. They're also both weak to water, I guess I should mention. So that's a bit of a negative. He does have pretty good hazard removal, considering Decidueye can be a defogger. Cryogonal can be a rapid spinner. You know, it's only 2, but you only really need, I think, 2 per team to really do well in terms of managing hazards. 2 options, and they don't necessarily share weaknesses, so that's a good thing besides fire. But he has resists for that, so I think this is actually a really great team. Like I said, it looks strange on paper, but there's threats everywhere on this team. They work really well in good combinations. So I'm excited to see what he can do. So now we're up to the top 5. At number 5, I have Nico, who has a dominating team. He's got the Mega Metagross and the Tapu Bulu and the Goodra, which is just probably one of the most insane Fairy Dragon Steel cores I could possibly even imagine. That's just like an insane combo. You could even fill in Gardevoir for Tapu Bulu if you didn't really want the terrain, but even still, like, Tapu Bulu's support for Mega Metagross is immense, being able to weaken earthquakes. That's a great pro to this team. I like how this team has dual weather. I think that's awesome with the Tyranitar and the Torkoal. I don't necessarily see the Sun doing super well with this team, mainly just because there's nothing that can really abuse it. But in terms of the sand, I mean, Mega Metagross and Nidoqueen kind of like being under the sand because it whittles down everything, you know, that isn't steel, rock, or ground type. So they can appreciate the chip damage for sure. This team has good hazard control. Tyranitar is a great, reliable stealth rocker. You've got good spinners on here. You even have the spin blocker with Jellicent. The biggest complaint I have about this team is honestly speed. Mega Metagross and Jolteon make up, you know, all of the decent speed tiers on this team, and everything else is kind of below par. But that's not necessarily a problem because this team makes up for it in like raw power and versatility. Whereas I feel like the teams up to this point kind of lack as much versatility or as much power as this one does. Z Nidoqueen, by the way, is a great idea. While it's pretty slow for a Z Captain, it can always at least take a hit, and it should be able to pull off really cool Z moves with such a wide move pool. So, you know, like Nidoking, which I literally just discussed, you can run it physical or special as well. Nidoqueen, I mean. So it's definitely a really threatening Z Captain. I like it as an addition to this team. It also appreciates Tapu Bulu because Earthquakes are weakened, and that sounds strange, but Nidoqueen really does like Earthquakes weakened because it doesn't rely on Earthquake, it can rely on Earth Power instead. So you have a ground type that can effectively work under your Tapu's terrain. So I think it's really smart planning, really smart drafting, and overall just a really good team. Even, I didn't even mention it, but there is also a Fire Water Grass here as well with the Jellicent, the Torkoal, and the Tapu Bulu. It's kind of a nice bulky offensive core. Pretty slow, but it gets the job done. In terms of type synergy, it works really well, and that's all that really matters. At number 4, we have my boy Stronghold, the guy with the golden voice, GBA analyst. He drafted a phenomenal team, have to say. This isn't biased because he has Tangrowth, promise. The Mega Diancie, always threatening, got even better this generation now that it doesn't have to wait one turn to get its speed. Normally you had to run Protect, but now you don't really have to do that, so that means that you basically get an extra move slot now. Not to mention Diamond Storm got buffed, so now you get +2 defense. So if you land that Diamond Storm, you're going to be able to take a bullet punch, and that's scary. Tornadus T, threat. Zygarde, 50% threat. Tangrowth threat. Alolan Muck threat. Like, everything on this team is a threat. Z Infernape, that's insane. Infernape is probably one of the best Z candidates in my opinion, considering, you know, it has great mixed offenses, great speed, lots of things you can do with its offensive move pool, also different forms of setup. So it's a great Z Captain candidate in my opinion. He even has Dugtrio, which can trap. Like, this team can achieve so much, I think. Like, there's so many different things going on here that just work well together. In terms of cores, because I've talked about it for everybody's team, he does have them. He has Mega Diancie, he's got Registeel, he's got Zygarde for the Fairy Dragon Steel. I like this core because, again, it goes back to what I said earlier. I think the key to a good core in this format, having a little bit balance within what all of their roles are in the core. So Registeel, you have the defense. Zygarde can kind of pull off defensive sets or offensive sets. And then Mega Diancie is the hard-hitting offense of the core. So I kind of like how it works here. Fire Water Grass is also really strong too, considering you have Milotic, which is a huge threat in Draft League. I feel like people don't really pay enough attention to it. Infernape and Tangrowth, that's like a disgusting core. This team even has all like the bells and whistles you would need. You even have a Regenerator core with Tornadus and Tangrowth. I know that it's Ice Weak, and on top of Zygarde, that can be a bit of a problem, and Dugtrio. Decent amount of ice weakness, it's a bit of a problem. There's also a handful of ground weaknesses which I don't like. There are some immunities on the team with Mesprit and Tornadus, and you have a resist with Tangrowth, but you know, you've got Muck Weak, Registeel, Infernape, Diancie. None of them like the ground hits, even Electabuzz, who sometimes people shake their heads at that, but you have to remember that I think George had it on his championship team, and Eviolite Volt Switch, it's nothing to mess around with. That being said, there's even Volt Turn cores on here with Tornadus and Electabuzz, so I don't know. This team, I think, just does so many things right. Stromp's a cool guy too, so I expect him to do really cool things with this team. We have Armaldo in common too, and I think Armaldo's a great hazard management Pokemon. And Mesprit too, with all the different support options he can run. Healing Wish is going to put some life back into some Pokemon, I feel. So I'm excited to see what it can do, for sure. At number 3, we have DeBoss, who has a really, really solid team. He's got Mega Alakazam, who is, I mean, like, it got a buff this generation, but it was only 10 points in special defense. I mean, Mega Alakazam has always kind of been a threat. One of the highest speed stats in the game. Amazing special offense. It's definitely a huge threat. Based on his team, you know, it gives him a lot of needed speed because he does have some pretty slow Pokemon on his team. The Garchomp is there with speed, and he has some base 100s with like Entei and Shaman, Tentacruel. But the larger point about it is that Alakazam, you know, surpasses even like the stuff that's just above base 100, you know. In terms of cores, I think this team has a really good Fire, Water, Grass core. Tentacruel, Shaman, Entei. I like how Tentacruel can spin for Entei. I like how Shaman can take the ground attacks for both of them. I even also like the combo of Mandibuzz and Tentacruel. They cover each other so well, minus the electric weakness part. Mandibuzz can take ground and the psychic, and then Tentacruel can take the ice, it can take the fairy. So I really like how those two work together, and they both can remove hazards, so they can work together in tandem as a really annoying defensive core. The hazard management is probably one of the most impressive parts of this team. I see so many different options for setting hazards up and being able to get rid of them. So many hazard setters with Garchomp, Cobalion, I think even Rampardos get Stealth Rocks. I don't know why you'd want it on it though. You have Frostlass as a spin blocker. And then, you know, with all these different utility things on here, this team has room for crazy offense still, because you have Entei. Sacred Fire is like a no free switch in move unless you have like a Guts Pokemon, I guess. But even still, you're going to take a lot of damage. Tauros, even, I think deserves some credit, because Tauros is actually amazing in draft leagues, I feel. It's very underappreciated. Normal types always have that crazy wide move pool. Shaman with Seed Flare, easily spammable move. I think it's a great option. Vikavolt, really hard hitting. Garchomp, I don't even need to tell you about Garchomp, everybody knows about Garchomp. Sylveon, being able to hit through substitutes if people try to set up on the more defensive Pokemon, such as Tentacruel, Mandibuzz, stuff like that. Overall, like, I can't even like put it into words, but like, this team is just an overall good draft. Z Cobalion, even, which I didn't even really mention, is a great pick for a Z captain, I feel. The speed is nice. He lacks, you know, immediate offense. Like, his offensive stats aren't great from the start, but he does get Swords Dance, which is cool. And I think that's why it's kind of a good Z captain, because even though its attack stat doesn't start as high as, say, something like Terrakion, you can go for the Z move, and, you know, it might be that push it needs to get the KO on certain things. So I definitely like Cobalion as a Z captain. I like a lot of picks on this team overall, and I'm really excited to see how well it does. At number 2, we have Gengar Raichu, runner-up for my power rankings here. This team, I was making comments on it during the draft itself about how it was coming together and about how scary I thought it was. He started by drafting Mega Sableye, and then I'm pretty sure right thereafter he got Gliscor, and I already knew, like, this team is already, like, stupid, crazy, annoying, but, like, in a good way. Like, I mean that in a good way. But then the team filled out, and I realized it's not even just annoying, it's just good. This team is just great. Z-Mew just needs to be talked about forever because of how many possible options it can run. It's insane. Like I mentioned before with the Azelf thing, being able to tank knockoffs easier with the Crystal because it doesn't get knocked off is incredible. Normally you'd have to run Colbur Berry or something like that, and then after the Colbur Berry is gone, you kind of just don't really have an item. With Z-Mew, you get the effect of Colbur Berry, where like the knockoff is weakened, but I mean, like, obviously the other dark type moves aren't going to get weakened, but like the key here is that knockoff, which is probably the best utility, attacking move you have, is nullified because you're holding the crystal, and you can use you have so many different options. You guys know how many options Mew has. It's incredible. A great pro for this team is the versatility, considering you have so many Pokemon that can run special or physical, such as the Mew, the Flygon, the Sableye, all sorts of things. You could even go as far to say as the Metagross and the Venusaur. All really cool. There's lots of setup options for this team, which I actually kind of like. Flygon getting Dragon Dance now. Gliscor is probably going to do some Swords Dance things. Sableye is probably going to do some Calm Mind things. I can definitely see that happening. Barbarical even with Shell Smash. Great late game sleeper, pretty underrated. And let's not forget Silvally. Now, the league has decided to only allow 4 memories, but outside of the 4 memories, you can run the normal Silvally with any item you choose. So Silvally can do some Swords Dance things. Silvally also adds to the versatility of this team, considering you can change the type up. He chose Water, Poison, Fairy, and Flying, which I actually think are pretty good typings for his team based off of what he chose. Flying's the only one I really kind of question, considering he has the Gliscor and the Flygon already, both weak to ice pretty heavily. He has to rely on that Volcanion, I guess, for the dedicated 4 times resisting ice. I guess you could switch into Metagross too. That being said, I guess his team loses to Mamoswine pretty heavy on paper, but then again, whose team doesn't lose to Mamoswine on paper? But overall, he's got pretty much everything he needs. He's got hazard setup, he's got hazard removal, plenty of hazard removal and prevention, considering he's got Mega Sableye, which is like the magic bouncer, Gliscor with the Defog, Flygon with the Defog, Avalugg with the spin. There's so many different things this team can do. I guess if I had to come up with a complaint, if any, I would complain about speed again, because that's all I've done this video. Invapom's the only real speed happening here, but I mean, it could be easily fixed by a Scarf on something like Flygon, or Volcanion, or even Mew from time to time, like who knows. So overall, it's a really, really great team. I really like how it turned out, and I knew I was onto something when I said, like, whoever drafted Mega Sableye and Gliscor, like, crap. So, it's a really great team. I want to see so many different cool Z moves from Mew. So yeah. And finally, at number 1, we have J or J Creams. Such an impressive team. Like, I'm so amazed by this team. I don't even know where to begin. I guess I should start with the Mega. Mega Venusaur is what a lot of people would consistently say is a top 5 Mega in this format. It's bulky, it can be offensive, it can be physical, it can be special, in terms of attacking, of course. It's limited in its offensive move pool, but like, hidden power could be all you really need. This thing is something you have to have like a flying or a psychic move for. Like, it's that kind of Pokemon where you need a coverage move on your team somewhere to beat this thing, and it works beautifully well. Like, in terms of pairing, beautifully well with Z Jirachi, which again is a genius Z Captain. Again with the knockoff strategy that I was talking about before, but also because Jirachi gets so many different unique moves, different things it can do, or even just for dealing damage. Z Ironhead, or you could even do Z Doom Desire or something like that. Z Zen Headbutt, all these different things. Mega Venusaur also works like stunningly well with Rotom Wash. Like, I can't even like begin to talk about that, with how like Rotom Wash only weak to grass, Mega Venusaur 4 times resists. Like, it works so beautifully. Like, this team doesn't even really need explaining. And like with Mega Venusaur and Jirachi, like, what is Mega Venusaur weak to? Psychic and Flying. What does Jirachi resist? Psychic and Flying. Like, it's great. He's got his cores all laid out. He's got Togekiss as the fairy. For Steel, you could sub in Steelix or Jirachi, either or. I like how there's some variation in there. And then For the dragon, you have Haxorus, which is pretty underrated, I would say. He doesn't have a crazy move pool, but sometimes all you really need is just that Outrage or that Earthquake or that Poison Jab. Sometimes you don't really need much else. Especially after a Swords Dance, you know, like, who knows what's gonna happen. Like, as soon as Haxorus gets a Swords Dance up, like, sometimes half the things that were switch-ins, like, suddenly just aren't switch-ins anymore. They would just die. I gotta love the Miltank, just because Miltank, I think, is one of my favorite Pokemon in draft format. So many different things you can do. Can do pretty much anything, considering it gets Clericking sets with Heal Bell and Milk Drink. It also gets offensive sets. It has base 100 speed, which is like surprisingly good. All sorts of stuff. It can even set up Stealth Rocks, which is crazy. The Firewater Grass Core is probably also like the main attraction. Chandelure, like, one of the highest special attack stats in the game of like a normal Pokemon, like, that's not a legendary. The Venusaur and the Rotom Wash, like, that's so impressive. Like, that's such a strong core. Like, there's so much knowledge that goes into that too, because you even think about, you know, like, normally you have the grass type resisting ground for the fire type, but like Mega Venusaur doesn't fully resist ground, so he's got Rotom Wash with like Levitate. Like, it just, so much of this fits well together. Gligar is normally a pick that I would complain about. I actually really like it on this team in terms of being able to manage hazards. That's really all it's used for. I don't think Gligar is very good at anything but that. It kind of like irks me to see people try and use Gligar for much else, but I actually really do like it on this team for that role. He even stacks at times some weaknesses in fire, considering he doubles up on steel, and some ice weaknesses. But then he's got, again, like, he's got Miltank with Thick Fat. Like, what does he have to worry about? Zebstrika, like, he even made use of his tier 5. Like, Zebstrika gives him some really good needed speed. It gives him a Volt Switcher. Everybody, I think, needs a fast electric type, and sometimes Rotom Wash just isn't fast enough. And I've been holding back from talking about it, but Weavile, like, that's one of the most potent offensive Pokemon you could possibly have. And alongside, like, Venusaur, it's just so scary. Not to mention that Venusaur can switch in for a majority of hits that would knock Weavile out, probably barring some really strong fire attacks. But yeah, this team just fits so well together. Like, it's terrifying. Personally, this is why I think it's the best team that was drafted. Just, I could go on forever about Mega Venusaur and Zjirachi. Like, really, that's so much of why I have it up here. It's just how powerful that is. I mean, everything else on here works really well too. It's just that's such a scary combo. I don't know who let that happen. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. This has been my power rankings. Please don't yell at me. Please don't be upset if you are placed, you know, too low, or I guess don't be too comfortable if I place you too high, because this is just based off of the teams and how I think they'll work, but I don't know everybody's play styles. I don't know, you know, how you guys battle, how you guys prepare, and how you guys will make use of these Pokemon. I just made observations based off of what I've seen and what I know and how I battle. So, that being said, thank you guys for watching. Good luck in all of your battles this season, and I will be talking to you guys, so bye-bye.